It was a rainy Tuesday morning, the kind where the clouds sat heavy on the sky like they were nursing a secret. The city bustled under umbrellas and fast-moving feet, but for Mrs. Helen Turner, it was just another day of silence. She wasn't going anywhere important. She hadn't had anywhere urgent to be in years, but every morning, like clockwork, she would walk 2 blocks with her cane, climb onto the 7:45 city bus, and ride through town just to feel less alone. It was her way of pretending that life still had a rhythm for her. Her late husband used to say, "Helen, life moves whether you're ready or not." And so Helen moved with it, slowly, quietly. At 72, Helen had become something of a fixture on the bus. The drivers knew her by name, though she rarely spoke. She'd take her seat near the middle, not too close to the front where the loud teenagers sat, not too far back where it smelled of damp coats and trouble. Just the middle, with a view of the window and a gentle sway that matched her heartbeat. That morning, the bus was more crowded than usual. She clutched her cloth handbag a little tighter as she stepped aboard. The driver, Tom, gave her a small nod. "Morning, Miss Helen." She nodded back with a tired smile and moved slowly to her usual seat. Her knees ached with every step, but she didn't let it show. Not today. She had barely settled into her spot when the bus lurched to a stop again, and the door hissed open. That's when she noticed her. A young girl, soaked from the rain, stepped aboard with a bundled-up infant in her arms. Her hoodie was thin, and her jeans clung to her legs like they were painted on. Her eyes darted around nervously looking for a seat, but none were available. Not a single soul moved. Helen watched as the girl rocked the baby gently, trying to soothe its soft whimper. The baby let out a tired cry, barely more than a whisper, but it was enough to draw cold stares from some passengers. A man in a business suit sighed loudly. Another woman turned up her headphones. No one moved. Not one person offered her a seat. Helen hesitated. Her legs were stiff, and her joints were already screaming from the cold, but something inside her stirred. An old instinct, maternal, gentle, stubborn. She placed her hand on the metal pole, pushed herself up slowly, and spoke, her voice dry but steady. "Take mine." The girl looked at her, surprised. "Oh, no, ma'am, I couldn't." But Helen was already moving aside, gripping the pole for support. "Don't argue with an old woman, sweetheart. Sit. The baby needs you more than I need to sit." Reluctantly, the girl slid into Helen's spot, clutching the baby tighter. She looked down, cheeks pink with embarrassment. "Thank you," she whispered. Helen smiled as she held onto the pole and adjusted her balance. "You're welcome. Is the baby okay?" The girl nodded. "She's just tired. Didn't sleep much." Helen nodded knowingly. "Babies never sleep. When you need them to." A soft chuckle escaped from the girl's lips. "Yeah, that's true." For the next few minutes the bus rumbled on, and the two sat in a kind of gentle silence, surrounded by strangers who looked everywhere but at each other. The girl occasionally looked up at Helen as if to say something, but always stopped short. As they neared her stop, Helen slowly made her way toward the door. Before stepping off, she looked back. "You're doing better than you think," she said. The girl blinked in surprise. "What?" "Being a mother," Helen added. "I can tell." And with that, Helen stepped off into the rain. Back in her apartment, Helen's morning routine continued. She placed the kettle on the stove, set out a single cup, and flipped through her old worn photo album while the water boiled. It was always the same pages she looked at. Her husband in uniform, their tiny backyard garden, the empty nursery they had painted a soft green once. There had been hopes. So many hopes. She sipped her tea, wrapped herself in her old cardigan, and listened to the rain as it danced on the window pane. Her apartment was quiet, just the way it always was. Too quiet sometimes. Later that night, as she prepared for bed, something unusual happened. Just as she was turning off the porch light, she heard a knock at the door. It wasn't a loud knock, just one soft tap. She opened the door slowly. No one was there. She looked left and right, then down, and there, lying on the welcome mat, was a single piece of paper, folded twice. No envelope, no name. Just a note. Helen picked it up cautiously, her hands trembling, slightly as she unfolded it. The writing was uneven, hurried, and in dark ink. It read, "You saved more than my seat yesterday. You saved my life. I need to tell you everything." Helen stood frozen in the doorway. The rain still fell gently, and the street was empty. But something had changed. A chill ran down her spine, not from the cold, but from something deeper, something that whispered, this wasn't over. She closed the door, locked it quietly, and read the note again. "You saved my life." Her hands trembled as she sat down on the couch. The words played in her mind like an echo. She didn't know the girl's name, didn't know where she came from or where she had gone. But she knew that this wasn't just a thank you. It was a beginning, and somewhere out there, a young girl with a baby was reaching out. To her. Helen didn't sleep that night. The letter sat on the small table beside her bed. The words burned into her mind. She kept rereading it, hoping to discover something more between the lines. A clue, a hint, anything that would help her understand what the young girl meant. "You saved more than my seat yesterday. You saved my life." She turned in her sheets, staring at the ceiling in the darkness, her thoughts tangled with memories she hadn't touched in years. She remembered what it felt like to be young and scared. Not because she had children, she didn't, but because life had tested her in other cruel ways. She remembered the hollow ache of longing, the late nights whispering to the heavens, asking for a sign, and the days when silence was the only answer. Now this girl had shown up like a whisper from the past, needing someone. And somehow, that someone was Helen. The next morning, Helen rose before the sun, her bones aching more than usual. She didn't bother with her tea. She didn't flip through her photo album. Instead, she sat near the window, watching the empty street, waiting. She wasn't sure what she was waiting for. Another note, perhaps, or a knock. Or maybe just the courage to find out what was really going on. By noon, nothing had happened. She almost convinced herself it was over. Just a one-time note, maybe a thank you from a girl who had moved on. But then, just as the clouds began to shift and let the sun peek through, a soft knock came at the door. Helen's heart leapt in her chest. She shuffled over quickly and opened it. But again, no one stood there. Only this time, there wasn't just a note. There was a small paper bag, slightly damp from the morning mist. Attached to it was a folded napkin with another handwritten message. "You reminded me what kindness looks like. I left something small for now. I'm not ready to talk, but I'm not gone. Thank you. L." Helen took the bag inside carefully, like it was made of glass. Inside there was a plain croissant, wrapped in wax paper, and a small baby sock, pink, with a faded heart stitched near the toe. Her hands trembled again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was connection. Something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. She held the sock gently, running her fingers over the fabric. "Al," she whispered. That must be her name. The next few days unfolded slowly, like a delicate dance. Every morning, Helen would wake early, sit near her window, and wait. And each morning, something would arrive at her door. A new note, a small item, a quiet piece of the puzzle. One day, it was a photograph of the baby, blurry but beautiful, with the words, "Her name is Hope," written on the back. The next day, a small hand-drawn picture, stick figures of a girl, a baby, and an old woman holding hands. Helen's heart melted each time. She hadn't realized how deeply she needed this connection, too. Finally, after nearly a week of this silent exchange, Helen found a longer letter on her doorstep. This one was written in full sentences, though the handwriting was still hurried. It began, "Dear Miss Helen, I don't know how to start this, but I guess I should tell you the truth. My name is Lacey. I'm 17. Hope is 6 months old. I've been on my own since before she was born. My mom kicked me out when she found out I was pregnant. My boyfriend vanished before that. I've been couch surfing, staying in shelters, sometimes sleeping in laundromats or buses. The day I met you, I hadn't eaten. Hope had a fever. I was on my way to the hospital, but I didn't even have bus fare. I was planning to beg the driver, but he let me on anyway. And then, you gave me your seat. It wasn't just a seat, Helen. It was a moment of dignity. A moment where I didn't feel like garbage. I can't explain it, but you made me feel human again. That night, I went to the hospital. They treated Hope for an ear infection. She's okay now. But as I sat there, I kept thinking about you, about how someone so small and old and quiet could carry so much kindness. I kept your face in my mind like a lighthouse. I decided I wanted to tell you, to thank you. I don't know if I can be brave enough to see you in person yet, but I want to try. If you're willing, meet me Friday. Bus stop, noon. I'll be there with Hope. Thank you for being kind when the world wasn't. Lacey." Helen wiped tears from her cheeks as she finished reading. Her fingers gently smoothed the paper, and her lips trembled as she whispered, "Friday, noon." For the next 2 days, she barely slept. She picked out the nicest sweater she owned, brushed her thinning hair, even found a brooch her husband had given her one anniversary, a tiny silver dove. She pinned it carefully to her collar and sat on the edge of her seat the whole morning of that Friday. At 11:40 a.m., she left her apartment and began the slow, careful walk to the bus stop. Her cane tapped against the sidewalk with a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. It was Hope, nervous Hope. As she neared the corner, she saw her Lacey. She stood beneath the shelter, holding a baby wrapped in a soft blue blanket. Her hoodie was cleaner, her eyes still tired but alert. When she saw Helen, her lips parted in surprise, almost disbelief, and then curved into a hesitant smile. Helen smiled back. "I hope I'm not late." Lacey shook her head, suddenly unsure whether to cry or laugh. "You came." "Of course I came," Helen replied softly. "You asked." For a few moments they stood in silence. Helen stepped closer, slowly, until she was close enough to see the baby's tiny eyelashes fluttering in sleep. "She's beautiful," Helen whispered. "Her name's Hope," Lacey replied. "Because that's all I had when I found out about her." Helen nodded. "It's a good name. Strong." They sat on the bench together, not saying much at first. But slowly, the words began to flow. Lacey told her about the night her mother screamed at her to leave, about the nights she spent crying in gas station bathrooms, feeding Hope with bottles warmed under dryers, about the volunteers who sometimes helped, but more often the stares and whispers. Helen listened, not just politely, but fully. She listened with her eyes, her hands folded gently, her heart wide open. "I've made so many mistakes," Lacey said finally, her voice barely. Above a whisper, Helen reached over and touched her hand. "You made a person. That's not a mistake. That's a miracle." Tears rolled down Lacey's cheeks. For the next hour, they sat and talked. Helen shared stories, too, of her husband, her miscarriages, the emptiness that followed, the loneliness that crept in like ivy. Lacey held Helen's hand tighter. They weren't so different after all. Just two women who life had bruised in different ways, finding healing in the most unexpected of places, a crowded city bus. When they finally Stood to leave, Lacey said something Helen never expected. Would it be okay if we saw you again? Hope really likes you. I think I do too. Helen's eyes welled up again, but this time she laughed gently through the tears. I'd like that, Lacey. I'd like that very much. As they walked down the street together, the clouds broke apart and the sun bathed them in gold. Helen realized then the world hadn't forgotten her. It had just been waiting for Lacey and Hope. And this, she knew deep in her soul, was just the beginning. The morning after the mysterious note appeared on Martha's door, she sat in her old rocking chair, staring at the folded paper as if it were some ancient relic waiting to be deciphered. Her wrinkled fingers gently traced the edges, and she read it again and again, memorizing every word, every curve of the handwriting. Thank you for what you did on the bus. You didn't just give me a seat, you gave me strength. I'd like to. See you again. L. Martha hadn't been called upon by anyone in years, except for the occasional knock from charity volunteers or the postman with her monthly pension check. But this was different. It felt personal. It felt like someone out there remembered her, valued her. In a life filled with silence and solitude, even the smallest note could echo like a symphony. She placed the note down beside her cup of tea and leaned back, closing her eyes. Her mind drifted back to that rainy day on the bus. The way the girl had clutched her belly protectively, the exhaustion on her face, the invisible burden she carried. Martha remembered it so clearly. Not just the act, but the instinct that told her to get up, to offer something, anything, in a world that so often looked away. She had no idea that moment would come back to her like this. By the time the clock hit noon, a knock echoed at her door. Martha startled. No one ever came at noon. She rose slowly, using her cane to steady herself, and opened the door cautiously. Standing there was the same young girl, Lila. She looked different now. Her eyes had a light in them. She wore a simple sundress and held a paper bag in one hand. "Hi," Lila said with a nervous smile. "I hope it's okay. I found your address from the bus stop directory." Martha was speechless for a moment. Then she smiled warmly and stepped aside. "Of course it's okay, dear. Come in." Lila entered, her eyes scanning the small, but cozy home. Everything had a sense of age and story. The old piano with yellowed keys, the knitted throws, the black and white photographs in dusty frames. "I brought lunch," Lila said, lifting the bag. "I thought maybe we could eat together." Martha's heart swelled. It had been years since someone had shared a meal with her, other than during church gatherings. They sat together, unpacking sandwiches and soup, sharing small smiles and careful conversation. At first, it was hesitant, but then Lila began to open up. She spoke of her life before the bus ride, how her parents had passed away when she was 16, how she had bounced from one friend's couch to another, how she ended up in a shelter after discovering she was pregnant. "I was ashamed," she said softly. "I didn't think anyone would care. People stared at me like I was trash. But that day, you looked at me like I mattered." Martha listened with quiet intensity. Every word Lila spoke reached into corners of her own heart she thought were long closed off. Memories of her own past bubbled up, of being young, pregnant, and alone after her husband died in the war. How the world hadn't been kind to widows either. How society forgot the women who bore the weight of grief and responsibility. "You remind me of myself," Martha finally said. "Except I didn't have a Martha on that bus when I needed one." Lila smiled sadly. "Well, now I do." They talked until the afternoon sun cast golden patterns on the living room rug. When Lila stood to leave, she hugged Martha gently, as if afraid to break her. Martha clung back like a woman holding on to something fragile and precious. "I'll come." "Again," Lila promised, and she did. Day after day, week after week, she returned. Sometimes with groceries, sometimes just to talk. Martha began to feel something she hadn't in years: hope. She looked forward to the knock on her door, the warmth of another soul in her quiet. Home. They became family in a way neither expected. Lila would sit on the floor beside Martha's feet, her belly growing with each visit, and they'd talk about baby names, life, regrets, and resilience. Martha taught her how to knit tiny socks. She even pulled out her late husband's old cradle, dusted it off, and placed it near the window in the guest room. "This was his," she said, her voice trembling. "But now it's yours." Lila wept that day, not just for the kindness, but for the feeling of being seen and held, finally. The bond between them grew deeper. Lila began calling Martha Gran, and Martha started referring to Lila as my girl. They filled in each other's gaps. The loneliness that had once clung to the walls of Martha's home began to fade, and the emptiness in Lila's heart, the part that feared she'd raise a child alone, started to heal. But the story didn't end there. One late evening, as Martha was dozing off in her chair, a phone rang, a sound she hadn't heard in months. It was Lila. "Martha," she said breathlessly, "it's time." Martha's eyes widened. "Time? The baby. He's coming." Without a second thought, Martha slipped on her coat, grabbed her cane, and called a cab. She wouldn't let Lila go through this alone. Not after everything. At the hospital, doctors and nurses buzzed around as Martha sat by Lila's side, holding her hand, whispering old lullabies and prayers. Hours passed, filled with pain and strength and anticipation, and then, at dawn, a cry broke the silence. A baby boy. Lila held him to her chest, tears streaming down her cheeks. Martha wept too, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch the child's tiny fingers. "He's perfect," she whispered. "Just perfect." Lila looked up at her with exhausted but grateful eyes. "Gran, I want you to name him." Martha was stunned. "Me?" Lila nodded. "You saved us. You gave us a new life. I want him to carry a piece of you." With tears spilling freely now, Martha said softly, "Call him Henry, after my husband. He would have loved this." And so it was. Baby Henry, born not just of love, but of kindness and fate, and an unexpected meeting on a rainy day. The months that followed were a whirlwind of new beginnings. Martha's house, once still and quiet, echoed with baby giggles and lullabies. She was no longer just a lonely old lady with a kind heart. She was a great-grandmother in spirit, but there was more to come. Much more. One spring afternoon, Lila arrived at Martha's house with a strange look on her face. "What is it, dear?" Martha asked, sensing something. "There's something I never told you," Lila said, and what she said next would change everything. Martha's hands trembled slightly as she placed the teacups on the table, her eyes never leaving Lila's face. The young mother sat across from her, eyes filled with uncertainty, fingers fidgeting with the corner of a baby blanket. Baby Henry slept peacefully in the cradle beside them, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Martha finally broke the silence. "What is it, dear? You look like you've seen a ghost." Lila looked up, her expression unreadable at first, then shifted into something between guilt and nervous hope. "There's something I never told you. About me. About who I really am." Martha leaned forward, the weight of the moment settling between them like dust in sunlight. "I wasn't just homeless when we met," Lila began, her voice low. "I was running away, hiding." Martha's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in concern. "Hiding from what?" "From my family," Lila said, tears forming. "From my past, from everything." Martha reached across the table and gently placed her hand over Lila's. You don't have to explain, not if you're not ready. But Lila shook her head. No. I want to. You deserve to know. She took a deep breath, and the words began to pour out like floodwaters breaking through a dam. My full name is Lila Crestwood. I'm the daughter of Douglas Crestwood. Martha blinked. The name sounded familiar. Her mind churned, connecting dots like pieces of a forgotten puzzle. He's the CEO of Crestwood Enterprises, Lila added. That was it. Crestwood Enterprises, the powerful real estate empire with properties across the country. A name that made headlines. A name attached to wealth, power, and control. My father, Lila continued, voice bitter, he's not a kind man. Not at home anyway. He built an empire but broke everything else in the process. My mother died when I was 10, and he raised me like I was a product, not a person. I was a pawn in his business deals, especially when I turned 18. He arranged meetings with wealthy families, hoping I'd marry into more power. Martha listened, her heart breaking a little more with each word. I couldn't take it anymore, Lila said, and then I met someone who treated me like I mattered. His name was James. He wasn't rich or powerful. He was just kind. We fell in love fast, too fast maybe, but it was real. When I told my father, he exploded. Said James was a parasite, said I was embarrassing the family name. She wiped away a tear. I got pregnant shortly after. My father told me to get rid of it, or be disowned. I refused. James tried to stand by me, but he was in a motorcycle accident, didn't survive. Martha gasped softly. I was 20, alone, pregnant, and completely cut off. No money, no home, just a heart full of pain. She looked up, locking eyes with Martha. And then I met you. I was ready to give up, Martha. That day on the bus, I was planning to go back and give in to my father, even if it meant losing the baby. But then you gave me a seat, a moment of dignity. You didn't know me, but you saw me. Martha's eyes shimmered with tears. Her voice was soft but firm. That seat wasn't much, but I'm glad it gave you strength. It did, Lila whispered. You saved me in ways you'll never fully understand. There was a long silence, heavy with emotion but strangely comforting. Martha finally spoke. So, what now? Lila smiled faintly. I haven't spoken to my father since Henry was born. But yesterday I received a letter. A lawyer contacted me. My grandmother, my father's mother, passed away. She left me a portion of her estate. She was the only one in that family who ever truly loved me. I think she knew what I was going through. Martha blinked. What does that mean? It means, Lila said slowly, I have enough to start a new life. Not just survive, but truly live. Martha's heart lifted slightly. That's wonderful. But Lila's eyes held something more, something uncertain. There's more, she said. She left me her old countryside house. It's big, quiet, peaceful, and I don't want to go alone. Martha looked at her confused. I want you to come with us, Lila said. You, me, and Henry. We could start over, together. Martha's breath caught in her throat. You want me to leave all this? Lila looked around the modest home. I know it's a lot, but you don't belong here, sitting alone every day in a creaky chair and cold silence. You deserve laughter. You deserve to watch Henry grow up, not just in visits, but every day. Martha swallowed hard. Her eyes drifted to the baby in the cradle. He stirred slightly, a sleepy little sound, escaping his lips. Her heart swelled. I'm an old woman, she said. I'm not much use. You're everything, Lila said, her voice breaking. You're the reason I'm still here. I want you in his life. You're his gran." It was too much. The emotions, the memories, the possibilities. Martha looked down at her hands, once nimble, now slow, but they had strength still, maybe enough for one more adventure. "I'll think about it," she whispered, and she did. That night she lay awake, memories of her past mingling with dreams, of a different future. A future filled with cries and giggles and bedtime stories. A future that didn't end in silence. The next morning, Martha called Lila. "I'm coming," she said, her voice strong. "But only if I get the room with the window view." Lila laughed through her tears. "Deal." The days that followed were a blur of packing and goodbyes. Neighbors waved as Martha's belongings were loaded into a truck, most of them just memories in boxes. She kept only the things that mattered: her knitting basket, the cradle, old photo albums, and one cracked teacup she refused to part with. When the day came, Lila drove the car. Henry cooed in the back seat. Martha sat quietly, staring out the window as the city gave way to open fields and winding roads, and then, just as the sun dipped low in the sky, they arrived. The house was beautiful. Not grand or intimidating, but warm. It stood like a patient guardian surrounded by trees and flowers. Birds chirped in the distance. A swing creaked slightly in the breeze. "This," Martha whispered, stepping out of the car, "this feels like home." Inside, the rooms were sunlit and welcoming. Wooden floors, cozy nooks, a fireplace that begged for winter stories. Lila showed Martha to her room, a corner space with a wide window overlooking the garden. "You weren't joking," Lila said, smiling. "Best view in the house." Martha laughed softly. "I never joke about windows." The days turned to weeks, then to months. Their little family settled into a rhythm. Mornings began with baby giggles and the smell of breakfast. Afternoons were for garden walks and storytelling. Evenings ended with lullabies and shared tea. Martha found a purpose again. She taught Lila how to bake the perfect scones, how to patch up clothes with love, how to soothe a crying baby with just a whisper. Lila, in turn, brought youth back into Martha's life. She helped her with technology, showed her how to video call old friends, even signed her up for a knitting blog. The house was alive with love. But one day, something unexpected happened. A black car pulled into the driveway. A man stepped out, tall, stern, with silver hair and a suit that cost more than Martha's monthly pension. Lila froze. Her face drained of color. "It's my father," she whispered. Martha stood beside. Her, cane in hand, eyes narrowing slightly. Douglas Crestwood approached slowly. He looked tired, older than she remembered. He stopped a few feet away, eyes resting on Lila, then drifting to the house, and finally to baby Henry, who played on a blanket. I had to see you," he said quietly. Lila didn't answer. Martha's presence beside her felt like a wall of safety. "I was wrong," he said, "about everything. I thought money could fix things. I thought control meant love. But when I lost you, and then lost my mother, I realized how much I'd broken." He looked at Henry again. "I never knew what real legacy meant, until I saw your son's face." Lila's eyes brimmed with tears. Her heart ached with all the years of silence, anger, and pain. "I'm not here to force anything," Douglas said. "I just want a chance to be better, to meet him." Martha watched Lila's face, knowing the battle happening behind her eyes. Forgiveness is a journey, not a moment. Lila stepped forward, placing a hand on Henry's head. "You can meet him," she said softly. "But this is his home now. This is our family." Douglas nodded, eyes glistening. "I understand." He looked at Martha and gave a slight bow. "Thank you," he said. Martha didn't respond immediately. She simply looked at him and said, "Don't waste this second chance." And with that, Douglas turned and walked back to his car. Lila watched him go, then looked down at Henry, then over at Martha. "Gran," she said, "do you think people really change?" Martha wrapped an arm around her. "Sometimes," she said, "but the real change isn't in them. It's in us, when we choose love anyway." The sun dipped low, casting golden light across their porch. The wind whispered through the trees, and baby Henry giggled as a butterfly danced near his feet. And in that moment, surrounded by 3 generations of brokenness and healing, the story of an old woman's kindness, a young mother's courage, and a child's future came full circle, not as a fairy tale but as something far more real. Family, unexpected, imperfect, but deeply, beautifully true. The next morning, Evelyn woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The memory of the note on her door, the warm and grateful words from a girl she barely knew, filled her heart with a joy she hadn't felt in years. She moved through her little kitchen with a bounce in her step, humming a soft tune as she brewed her tea. The simple act of kindness had bloomed into something much deeper, a connection, a reminder that the world still had warmth in it. But what Evelyn didn't know was that her life was about to take an even bigger turn. Later that day, as she sat by the window watching children walk home from school, there was a knock on her door. Startled, she stood up, smoothing down her sweater before opening it. It was the teen mom again, the same one from the bus. She looked shy, holding her baby in one arm and a small tote bag in the other. Evelyn's eyes softened instantly. "You came," Evelyn said, stepping aside. "Come in, sweetheart." The young girl hesitated only a moment before stepping in. "Hi. I hope it's okay. I wanted to thank you properly. My name's Mia, and this little guy is Jordan, Evelyn's." Heart melted as she looked at the baby in her arms, his round face peeking curiously over Mia's shoulder. She motioned toward the couch, and soon the two were sitting with cups of tea and quiet laughter filling the room. They talked for over an hour. Evelyn learned that Mia had been kicked out of her family home when she was just 16 and pregnant. She'd struggled, bouncing from one friend's couch to another, taking any job she could get. Her boyfriend had disappeared early on, leaving her to face everything alone. Her life had been one long string of closed doors and silent judgment. That day on the bus, she had been on her way to a job interview, exhausted and defeated. "You were the only one who saw me," Mia whispered, her eyes welling with tears. "Everyone else looked through me, like I didn't matter. But you offered me your seat. You gave me kindness when I needed it most." Evelyn reached over and held her hand. "You do matter, Mia. You and your son. You matter more than you know." From that day on, they became close. Mia began visiting Evelyn almost every day. The older woman would share her home-cooked meals, her stories, her warmth. In return, Mia helped her with errands, taught her how to use her old tablet to video call her out-of-state niece, and filled the lonely house with the sound of laughter and baby giggles. Jordan, with his chubby cheeks and playful babbles, became the joy of Evelyn's days. She began knitting little sweaters for him, finding excuses to spoil him like the grandmother she never got to be. Weeks passed, then months. Their bond only grew stronger. To the outside world, it may have seemed strange. A teenage mom and an elderly widow forming a family of their own. But inside that cozy little home, it felt like destiny. But while their days were filled with joy, Evelyn began noticing something. Mia was tired, not just tired in the way young mothers often are. This was deeper. She had dark circles under her eyes, and she was losing weight. She brushed it off every time Evelyn asked, blaming it on the long shifts at the cafe where she worked part-time. But Evelyn knew better. She could see the signs. One afternoon, after Jordan had fallen asleep on the rug, Evelyn gently asked again, "Mia, are you okay, sweetheart?" Mia hesitated. Her eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. "I didn't want to worry you," she whispered, "but I'm not doing okay. I lost my job last week. The place closed down. And the shelter I was staying in, they said I can't stay anymore with Jordan making noise at night." Evelyn's heart sank. "You're not safe?" she asked. Mia shook her head. "We've been sleeping in the back of a friend's car the last 2 nights." That night, Evelyn didn't sleep. She lay awake thinking, praying, and remembering the struggles of her own past. The years she and her late husband, Frank, had spent living paycheck to paycheck. The times they had to choose between food and rent. She remembered how it felt to have no one to turn to. And she remembered how one small act of kindness from a stranger had once helped them get back on their feet. By morning, she had made her decision. When Mia arrived the next day, Evelyn sat her down and handed her a small envelope. "I want you and Jordan to live here," she said gently. Mia's eyes widened in disbelief. But this is your home. I couldn't." "You're not taking anything from me," Evelyn said firmly. "You're giving me something I thought I'd lost forever. A reason to care, to love again. Let this be our home." Mia burst into tears, hugging Evelyn tightly. It was the first time she had felt truly safe in years. The next few weeks were filled with laughter, painting rooms, assembling a crib, and transforming Evelyn's quiet house into a lively home. Neighbors noticed the change. The music, the smell of fresh-baked cookies, the sight of Mia pushing a stroller while Evelyn walked beside her. But life has a way of weaving stories we don't expect. One day, while Mia was out at the market, Evelyn opened the door to a man in a suit holding a briefcase. "Mrs. Walters?" he asked politely. "Yes." "I'm from the office of Mr. Daniel Preston. He's the CEO of Preston Enterprises. We've been looking for a Miss Mia Carter." "Do you know where we can find her?" Evelyn blinked in surprise. She lives here now." "May I ask why?" The man smiled. "Well, Mr. Preston recently discovered some personal documents in a safety deposit box that indicate Miss Carter may be his daughter." Evelyn's mouth went dry. Later that day, Mia returned to find Evelyn pale and quiet. "What's wrong?" she asked. Panicked, Evelyn handed her the man's business card. "Someone came by today. He says he's your father." The room fell into silence. Mia sat down slowly, her mind reeling. "I never knew my dad. My mom used to say he was just some guy who left before I was born. I never believed her, but I never had proof either." "Well," Evelyn said gently, "you might now." That week, everything changed again. DNA tests confirmed what the documents had hinted. Mia was the daughter of one of the most successful businessmen in the state. Daniel Preston had never known she existed. When he found the old letter from her mother, tucked away in a box he hadn't opened in decades, he had set out to find her immediately. Their reunion was emotional and surreal. Daniel, overwhelmed with regret, promised to make up for the lost years, but even as he offered Mia a new life, a home, security, opportunities, she didn't hesitate to tell him, "I already have a home. With Evelyn. She saved me when I had nothing. She's my family." Daniel, moved by her words, insisted on meeting Evelyn. The day he came to her little home, he brought flowers and something more. A deed. A legal document transferring ownership of the house to Evelyn and Mia jointly. And a letter, thanking Evelyn for saving the daughter he never knew he had. That evening, after Daniel left, Mia sat beside Evelyn on the porch. Jordan giggled in her lap, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. "You know," Mia said softly, "all this happened because you gave up your seat on a bus." Evelyn smiled, a tear rolling down her cheek. "Sometimes the smallest kindness changes everything." But their story wasn't over yet. In fact, It was about to take one more unexpected turn. The sun dipped behind the trees as Evelyn sat, in her favorite chair, the soft creak of wood beneath her and the warm laughter of Mia and little Jordan drifting in from the kitchen. The once quiet house now buzzed with life, with energy, with love. And yet, despite the peace in her heart, Evelyn felt something stirring, a restlessness that reminded her that this wasn't just the end of a long road, but the beginning of a new one. In the days following Mia's reunion with her father, Daniel Preston became a regular visitor. He came bearing gifts, not extravagant ones, but meaningful ones. A family photo album from his side, a music box he'd kept since he was young, and most importantly, his time. He spent hours talking with Mia, trying to understand her life, her pain, her strength. Evelyn watched them with quiet pride. She never intruded, never made it about herself, but Daniel always made sure to include her. "You were her anchor," he said one evening, pouring Evelyn a cup of tea. "You did what I didn't. You stayed." Evelyn smiled, her hands wrapped around the warm mug. "She saved me, too. We saved each other." But even as the bonds of a new family formed, life, in its unpredictable way, had more to give. One morning, Evelyn received a letter in the mail. It bore a gold seal and was addressed in elegant handwriting. Curiosity piqued, she opened it and discovered an invitation to a charity gala hosted by the Preston Foundation. Her name was written in bold near the top of the guest list. At first, Evelyn chuckled. "A gala? Me," she said to Mia. "I don't have anything fancy to wear." Mia grinned. "Then we'll go shopping. You deserve this." They spent the next day trying on dresses, laughing like schoolgirls, and sipping cheap lemonade in the mall food court. Mia picked out a soft lavender gown for Evelyn, one that matched her silver hair and twinkling eyes. Evelyn couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so seen. The night of the gala arrived. Daniel sent a car, a sleek black sedan with a polite driver in a crisp suit. Evelyn stepped out at the venue, her heart thudding as cameras flashed and murmurs followed her up the steps. Inside, the ballroom glittered with chandeliers and polished floors. But amidst the sparkle, Evelyn walked with grace, her arm linked with Mia's, Jordan perched on her hip in a tiny baby tuxedo. Daniel stood on stage, tapping the microphone gently. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "tonight is not about wealth or prestige. It's about kindness, the kind that changes lives." He told the story of a teen girl alone on a bus, of an old woman who offered more than just a seat, of how one act of compassion set in motion a series of miracles. The room grew quiet as he spoke, eyes misting, hands clutched to hearts. "And tonight," Daniel continued, "we honor that kindness. Evelyn Walters, would you please join me?" The room erupted in applause. Evelyn, flustered but smiling, made her way to the stage. Daniel turned to her with a small box in hand. "This," he said, opening it to reveal a delicate silver brooch shaped like a heart cradling a star, "is the first annual Evelyn Walters Kindness Award. Starting today, every year, we will recognize someone whose simple act of compassion has made the world brighter." The crowd stood. Evelyn blinked back tears. "I never did it for attention," she whispered into the microphone. "I just saw someone who needed a little light. I think we all have light to give." The gala became a moment no one in that room would forget. Over the next few months, Evelyn's name became known, not as a celebrity, but as a symbol of hope. Schools invited her to speak. Volunteers visited her home, asking how they could help others. People began offering their seats on buses, smiling at strangers, starting food drives in her name. And as all this unfolded, life at home remained beautifully simple, yet Mia enrolled in college with help from her father's foundation. She pursued a degree in social work, inspired by those who had helped her and determined to give back. Evelyn proudly helped her with her essays, proofread her reports, and even sat in the front row when Mia gave her first-class presentation. Little Jordan grew fast. He began to walk, then talk. His first word, surprisingly, wasn't Mama or Dada, but Evie. Mia laughed when it happened, and Evelyn's heart nearly burst. Their days were filled with walks in the park, bedtime stories, burnt cookies, and the kind of laughter that echoes from the soul. Evelyn, who once spent holidays alone, now spent them surrounded by family. And every morning, she'd find a new drawing from Jordan tacked on the fridge, his little fingerprints proof that life had started over in the best way. But life, as always, continued to move forward. One cold winter morning, Evelyn sat quietly in her chair by the window, watching the snow fall. Her fingers, once quick and steady, now trembled slightly as she held her knitting needles. Her breath came a little slower. Her doctor had mentioned things. Age, slowing heart, small warnings she hadn't wanted to dwell on. Mia noticed. "You, okay, Evie?" she asked one evening as she wrapped a blanket around her. "I'm just full," Evelyn said softly. "Full? Yes. Full of love, of memories, of peace. If tomorrow were my last day, I'd go with a smile." Mia burst into tears and hugged her tightly. "Don't say that." Evelyn stroked her hair. "We don't get to choose when we leave, sweetheart, but we do get to choose what we leave behind." In the spring that followed, Evelyn passed quietly. In her sleep, a peaceful smile on her face and a letter on her bedside table addressed to Mia. Mia found it the next morning. With trembling hands, she opened it. "My dearest Mia, I never had a daughter of my own, but God gave me you. Thank you for sharing your life with me. Thank you for making my last years the happiest. Raise Jordan to be kind. Tell him Evie loved him more than the stars. And remember, every seat you offer, every hand you hold, every kindness you give, is a legacy. Love always." Evie Mia clutched the letter to her chest and wept. But even through her sorrow, she knew Evelyn hadn't really left. She lived in every part of their home, in Jordan's giggles, in the sun that streamed through the windows, in the whisper of wind that rustled the flowers they planted together. Years passed. Mia graduated, built a career helping young mothers, and even opened a shelter in Evelyn's name, Evie's Place. It became a sanctuary for the forgotten, the lost, the scared, a home where people found their second chance. And Jordan, now a young boy, would often stand in front of the big portrait in the shelter's entrance, a painting of Evelyn, smiling gently, and whisper, "Thank you, Evie." Because one day, on a crowded bus, a tired old woman offered a seat to a teen girl carrying more than just a baby. She carried the weight of the world, and with that simple act, Evelyn didn't just offer rest. She offered hope, a family, a future, and in doing so she left behind a legacy the world would never forget.